Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Groot-Niblink, and I will be your host. Today, Blake and I are wrapping up our fantasy projection series. This is part 4 of 4, where we are going to touch on the last 8 teams in the league. If you've been following along, you're no doubt as excited as we are to be wrapping this series up. If you have not yet caught those, you should definitely go back and check out the previous episodes. Honestly, think it's some of the best content that we've put out this year, is really diving deep into these situations, into these projections, understanding how these players can reach new heights or might plumb some new depths here in 2023-24. Both Blake's and my projections are live. You can find those on Twitter. You can find them in the Apples and Genos Discord server. Basically, anywhere you can find Apples and Genos, you will find those projections. So definitely make sure that you go and get into that. We're going to get into this, but first, we're going to hit that intro. And of course, I have your friend and my best friend, Blake Creamer, here with me to wrap this series. Blake, how are we feeling tonight?
Feeling awesome. Best friends forever. And I couldn't want to be anywhere else. This is it for me. I love it. And I'm so stoked to get these projections done. Oh, man. It's just such a grind. And I know you know what I'm talking about. But I'm so happy to have these out for our listeners to listen to.
Absolutely. One thing that we have to take care of before we dig into this is we had a little giveaway last week. We are asking for some 5-star ratings on the podcast, and the people came through, and we have a winner. The winner is Alley-Oop from the Discord server. He DM'd me on Discord and sent me a screenshot of his 5-star rating for the podcast. So thank you for that. Thank you to all who participated and sent in their screenshots. I will be in touch, and we will get you some of your own Apples and Genos merchandise similar to what I'm wearing right now. Now, for everyone else, you will want to stick around. We've got another giveaway coming up, but you are going to have to listen for a little bit to find out what that's going to be. Are you ready to get into this, Blake?
I'm ready, buddy. Let's get the biz.
All right, let's start with Seattle and coaching. We have Dave Haxtell back behind the bench there. And really, I think it's one of these situations where it's really hard to know what to make of these lines. Right now, I've got Beniers between McCann and Eberle, Wenberg between Schwartz and Burakovsky, but you also have a third line of Yanni Gord, Eli Tolvanen, and Oliver Bjorkstrand, which I think could be characterized as a middle six line more than a bottom six line. So that's kind of how I have it playing out. I don't know if it really even matters, honestly, Blake, to kind of characterize a top line versus a second line versus even a third line at some points in Seattle.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to matter. They're just rolling them out there, right? And and we'll get into it here, but doing these projections, it was really hard to figure out who got the minutes, right? Because it's even their top line is not exactly a top line. It's like a middle 9. That's what they have there in
Right.
Seattle.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem to be very, very evenly spread, especially at even strength, where you have just a total glut of players between like 13 and a half and 15 minutes. And then, yeah, they have a few guys that they roll out on the fourth line on occasion, but it really is kind of a top 9 situation. Now, on the top power play, I have it currently with Matty Beniers, Jared McCann, Eli Tolvanen, Oliver Bjorkstrand, and Vince Dunn. That is pretty much what they ran with in the playoffs, and I've kind of thought that they might come back to that. Blake, I think you've got a little bit of a different take on this, though.
Yeah, and again, like take this with a grain of salt, right? Because it's Seattle, and this truly is a bizarre team to try and project. So I am thinking that they're going to go with Burakovsky on that top power play and kick Bjorkstrand down to the second. They've kind of shown a penchant to minimize Bjorkstrand a little bit, which is kind of pissed me off because I think he could be a really good fantasy performer. He's someone I've sort of followed and drafted in a lot of cases for years, but now that he's in Seattle, it's like I don't know. It's kind of like a no-go zone for me, but I'm liking Burakovsky there on the top power play. I think that's where they're going to go.
Yeah. Let's talk about Burakovsky. He was the player that we had the biggest difference on projections in. You had him for 69 points, which is a very nice total. I had him down at 53. So talk to me about the bull case, and then I'll try to throw some cold water on
There you go. Yeah, it's not going to be hard, honestly, because what do you like?
it.
But Burakovsky, just to me, first off, just in basic stats, like he's had point paces of 60 plus over the last 4 seasons, right? So he's and 3 of those seasons were as like a second to third liner in Colorado, right? So he
Yep.
drives his own offense. Something I like about Burakovsky is his IPP. Like he's able to, I've got him for 69% IPP even strength. Nice. So he's and that's well within like kind of his range there that he's normally doing at even strength. So it's like potato with him. Like I think for me, Burakovsky, I've got him for and I didn't check yours, but in terms of power play, I've got him for like 2 minutes and 45 seconds on the power play and almost 20 power play points. So that's really key. And I'm not sure, what did you
Yeah.
have for Burakovsky for the power play?
Yeah, I have him down for 14 points. Yeah, half a minute less, basically. And then obviously I have him more slanted towards the second unit, which is really just kind of getting him away from McCann, which I think is the
Mhm.
primary shooter on that power play and probably their best overall player. So that's really what kind of drives down Burakovsky on the power play to me. And that pretty much, yeah, that is definitely the biggest part of the difference in our projections. I actually have him for a higher even strength IPP than you do. So
Oh my
there is
God.
that. But the biggest thing at even strength, so I would say like the difference in the power play units and who he's going to get exposed to on the power play, plus the half minute less on my side, definitely drags down his power play total.
Mhm.
Then at even strength for me, I've got him down at a 9% on ice shooting percentage. You've got him up at 10.8, which is actually a fairly significant number, all things told. So that's definitely the biggest catalyst, I guess. Yeah, you've got him for what is that, 20% more, um, more goals just being scored on the
Right.
ice
Yep.
when he's on the ice at even strength. So that is definitely a significant number. And whenever you're getting a percentage of that, that's going to drive up your overall number. So yeah, definitely, I'm just kind of not sold that he's going to get ideal deployment, ideal line mates. Like, does he stick with Wenberg? Wenberg is a bit of a black hole offensively.
Yep.
If I can definitely see the case where he does hit 69 points. Don't get me wrong. I just don't know that that's the most likely case for me, which is why I projected it the way that I did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so just the power play in general, this is a power play that they rolled players through and they've split fairly evenly. Like even the top power play unit, whatever that looks like game to game, has not really gotten massive share. Like it's not one of these 70% top power play units at any point. So it is definitely a kind of an influx power play and also a power play that's fairly evenly split, which just leads to a lot of pedestrian numbers on the power play for all members involved. If I had to say, I would point to McCann and Dunn as probably being the guys with the safest grasp on the top power play. They're the guys that I projected for 3 minutes average time on ice on the power play. Everybody else below that, I had Beniers and Bjorkstrand at 2 minutes and 45 seconds, which are the next highest. So those are the guys that I've got the next closest, just because I think Bjorkstrand is kind of turning into a bit of a power play specialist for this team, at least.
Mhm.
And it seems like that might be the way they want to just deploy him in general. And then Beniers just kind of projecting him to take another step in his second year in the league and to try to cement his role as the top center on this team. So that's just still maybe a little bit of wishful thinking on my part with regards to Beniers, but that's kind of how I'm seeing it overall.
Yeah, I mean that all makes sense to me for sure. Beniers, what did you have him for? You have him for 61, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I got him for 50, 59. So we're right in the wheelhouse. I think Beniers is going to get kind of add him to that power play as well. I think he's going to get Buku minutes, or at least Buku on this team. I think it'll be Beniers, McCann, and Dunn, and then a bunch of spare parts.
Yep. So let's talk about the defenseman there. Obviously, Vince Dunn had a massive season last year. Both of us have a pretty significant drawback this year. Actually, we both have him for 55 points on the dot. I have him for 10 goals. You have him for 11. So a little bit of difference there, but pretty much we're anticipating a very similar outcome here for Vince Dunn. I think he is legitimately a good defenseman and someone who can replicate some point totals in this range, in the 55-point range, and definitely there's a plus minus to that as well. I just don't think you can expect anything like the season we saw from him last year. Just all of the quote unquote luck metrics were redlining last year, and we just have to anticipate that that's going to come way back down once again. Seattle as a team kind of redlined on a lot of these metrics last year as well. Some of that may be repeatable. I'm definitely not. I don't think that I discounted them, like back down to league average or anything like that. I'm still projecting them to be an efficient team overall, but definitely a bit of a drop back from where they were as a team last year.
Yeah, Seattle, just a team that I've looked at a bunch this offseason. Like they were 17th overall in shots for per 60 and at even strength, and then first overall in conversion, right? Shooting percentage. So that doesn't make sense, right? That's got to give you pause, right? And
Mm-hmm.
two major culprits here, Jared McCann and Vince Dunn, right?
Yeah.
Like Vince Dunn, he cooked at 9.4% last season. That's got to go down, right?
Yeah.
This all said, I do like Vince Dunn, and just doing, I did a mock draft today, and Vince Dunn went in like the 11th round, and I like that. I was like,
Yep.
that's value for Vince Dunn, because we're still looking at a 50 to 60 point defenseman, I think. But I
Yep.
don't know. Is that kind of good value for Vince Dunn, do you think, Nate?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been saying I do think that there's a lot of value in defensemen late in drafts right now. It just seems like there's actually a fairly solidified group of top power play defensemen across the league right now. And so that just is kind of necessarily driving down the people that the fantasy hockey community at large has the least confidence in. And I'm happy to kind of take that variance play whenever that value presents itself. The other defenseman here, Adam Larson, had kind of his best offensive season last year. It still wasn't terrific. Obviously, a guy who's going to hit a ton and block a ton, and he's valuable in bangers cats for those reasons. But I don't think you can anticipate the same kind of offensive production next year. So just keep that in mind if you are looking at him in your bangers cats leagues. And then Justin Schultz, probably going to run the second power play unit there again. Still, I have him just down for 33 points overall. He's not a guy who gets a ton of even strength minutes there. And so I just think that this is a really limited ceiling player. If Dunn goes down, then I would anticipate it would be Schultz on the top power play unit getting a ton of power play minutes. But even then, you're probably looking at like a 45-ish point pace player because he's never going to assume the even strength minutes of a guy like Vince Dunn. So just really kind of muted value from the other defensemen in Seattle for sure.
Yeah.
I think that we should talk about some of the efficiencies of these particular players. You mentioned Jared McCann. Definitely see him taking a bit of a step back, but I was actually kind of surprised to see that regardless of that, like I have him projected for 17 minutes. You're right in line with that. I have him for 69 points next year, which is nice, 32 goals. You have him for 66 points and 30 goals. So we're both still anticipating that this is a pretty relevant player for fantasy. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm not projecting that there's going to be a change, but you can always tell yourself a story that Dave Hackstall even bumps him up to 18 minutes, and now you're looking at a guy who cracks 70 points pretty comfortably according to both our projections. So I do think that McCann is not someone that you should just write off just because you can see it instantly that he had a sky high shooting percentage last year.
Yeah, absolutely. That should all sort of even out, right? More minutes, less efficiency, right? And we could maybe see the same 70 points from McCann, like if all things go well.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the next team here, St. Louis Blues. In the coaching arena, you do have Craig Berube here again somehow. I talked about it. I remember talking about this on a pod last year that I thought that he could be fired just because the Blues were not looking good. They went on like this tiny little run and probably saved his job for the season with that tiny little run. And then they went right back to being pretty terrible. So I'm not a fan of this team overall. In my mind, there's kind of a clear top three, which I'm projecting as the top line right now. They may break this up just to kind of even out their scoring, but Robert Thomas, Pavel Buchnevich, Jordan Kyrou, the clear top three talents on this team. In my opinion, I have the second line right now as Braden Shen, Brandon Saad, and Jakub Vrana. How do you see that shaking out, Blake?
Yeah, no, I've got, I mean, maybe it's wishful thinking too, but Vrana, get him on that second line, get him on that, top six. And we'll talk about him a little bit later, but yeah, that's a player I'm excited about. And that's the way I sort of see it as well.
So power play here, again, similar to Seattle, this is a very evenly split power play. Actually, probably the most evenly split power play in the league, all things considered, as I went through these projections. I do think that, Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, Pavel Buchnevich over the course of a season, regardless of which unit they happen to be on in any particular game, over the course of the season, these are the guys who are going to end up on the top power play or getting at least the most minutes more times than not. And so they are the three players that I've projected for 3 minutes average time on ice on the power play for the season. Everybody else is pretty up in the air in my mind. On the back end, there's Torrey Krug, there's Justin Falk, there's talk of Scott Perunovich finally making his mark in the NHL, and maybe taking over a top power play role from the back end. Jakub Vrana is the guy that I have slotted in here on the power play. Maybe it's wishful thinking just because Vrana's obviously one guy that we've talked about a lot and a guy that can definitely be extremely efficient even in limited minutes. So maybe it's a little bit of wishful thinking here, but that's the player that I'm seeing getting the next most power play time at this point. I just think that he's clearly the most offensively talented player that they have after the big three. And so that's the way that I've got it hanging out right now.
Yeah, nothing else really makes sense for me. Like, who are they going to bump Vrana off for? Like Kasperi Kapanen, or like who? Kevin Hayes? Like, no. Brandon Saad? No, get the hell out of my sight. So yeah, Vrana, I'm right with you there, my man. And he just shows out in all the metrics we love. And last 20 games of the season, he got 14 points, including 10 goals, right?
Yeah.
And that was still in only 15 minutes. So it's a hyper efficient player. Like, just feed him some minutes. But again, you mentioned Berube. Like, I can't believe this guy's still the coach there. Like, he just went to town on his top two players, Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, just called them bums or whatever the hell he said. Like, I hate crap like that. It's just like these guys are locked into term and you're tooting right in their face. So that show ain't no good, right? But he's still here. I can see a real short leash for Berube. And then, all bets are off once if he gets fired, that's for sure.
Yeah, if that comes through, then definitely there will be some shakeup and could be a good thing for some players and a bad thing for others, depending who the current favorites are at that point in Berube's mind. But yeah, just to paint a little bit more picture on the Vrana projection, both of us have him 60, 61 points, around like 35 goals, 36 goals. And then that's based on just under 16 minutes average time on ice. So definitely there's a bull case where if he gets in the good graces, it's not something he's been able to do at any stop so far in his NHL career. But if that ever happens, you do have the ceiling case here for Jakub Vrana, where you could really see him go off, have a 40-plus goal season, have a 70-plus point season. All those things are on the table for a player with these kind of underlying stats. So that's a player to watch for sure from this team. On the back end here, Blake, I think we should talk about Krug versus Falk. Do you buy into the Perunovich kind of, I don't know if it's a hype train per se, but he has been bandied around a little bit as a player that could emerge just given what seems to be a fairly murky situation, especially on that top power play unit?
Yeah, maybe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it was any other defenseman besides Krug and Falk, like, I mean, Krug is not in favor there in St. Louis. Like, he's clearly out of favor with the coach. They tried to trade him. He said no. So it's and he's your number one power play defenseman who his numbers or his deployment went down last season. So they're just rolling him out, giving him the Tony DeAngelo treatment. All right. And that show ain't no good. So I think there is a little bit of a window. If Perunovich comes into camp and shows out, like, I think St. Louis likes the role that Falk plays. Like, he's good at that role. He can deliver, offense and goals, just how he's being deployed as is. Right. So if they get this guy Perunovich in here, like, he's supposed to be a stud. I've seen a few of the highlights. Like, I like the player, but again, you're banking on a rookie to come in and be power play one. Like, it's like Kalen Addison last year. You know what I mean? And it's not even
Mhm.
as good as Kalen Addison last year. It's like even less than that. So I mean, definitely keep him on your watch list. I drafted him in one of the best ball leagues just for fun. All right, but it was like my 21st pick or something like that. So I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, sure, I'll take a ride with Perunovic. But yeah, it's far from guaranteed.
for sure. So let's talk about differences in projections. We were pretty tight on these, quite honestly. The one that was the furthest apart, I guess we could just kind of run through. So I had Thomas for 77 points, Buchnevich for 79, and Kairu for 74. You had Thomas for 73, Buchnevich for 85, and Kairu for 78. So you can tell we're pretty tight on this. Let's talk about Buchnevich in particular. You're a little bit higher on him, obviously over a point per game, where I'm just under. Talk to me about Buchnevich and what you like about what you see there.
Yeah, I mean, first off, like eye test stuff. I like the player. I like the way he plays, and he's in a good situation there. He's had a lot of injury issues, right? Like hasn't been able to finish a full season ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of sucks, right? So this is an 82 game projection, obviously, but I looked at the season he had last year. He redlined his shooting percentage, highest of his career, 21.1%. IPP was sky high as well. And I regressed everything like quite a bit, like I projected him here for, I think 14.6% after a 21% season last year. It's just the numbers. I kept them all like regressed a little bit and he still popped for like 85 points. It was kind of weird for me to see. Like it became, after I projected him, a player that I'm low key excited about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because he bangs as well. He does that. Like, to a degree, I've got him for 75 hits and 35 blocks, but I think he's going to be solid on the power play. Like as long as he stays healthy, I've got him for 24 power play points as well. So I don't know. I'm interested to hear why. Like we're still pretty tight, but you had him for 78, I think. Like, how do you see Buchnevich this season?
Yeah, I'm just looking through here to see what our differences are on the underlying metrics. I have Buchnevich for 22 power play points. You have him for 24, so there's a little bit of difference there, but not much.
Mhm.
It is really just, again, kind of a situation where I'm just slightly less bullish on the player in a few different metrics. On ice shooting percentage at even strength is a little lower for me, and the shots per 60. So just a few minor things. We are pretty tight on the overall time on ice projection there. So that's not really driving anything here. It is just really a few minor things. As I said, we're really only, what is it,
Yeah.
6 points apart here. So it's not a major difference. I think we're pretty tight on the player overall and what we expect from him. But I will say that St. Louis in general is a very difficult team to project because they're really efficient. Really good shooting percentage, and they've done this multiple years at this
Yep.
point.
Yep.
But at the same time, when you're looking at the metrics, and I've talked about this before, but like the ratio of scoring chances to shots that they're putting out there, it's not that high. So you kind of wonder if the shooting percentage is sustainable, but yet they've done it for multiple years. So I think there's probably something to this system that works a little bit better than the metrics that we typically look at reveals. So I'm giving that a little bit of credence, and I think you're honestly just giving it a little bit more than I am, being slightly more bullish on these players than I am, which is a little bit of a trend if you followed
Sure.
along with these
No,
episodes.
I do that. All right. Optimist, pessimist. All right. There you go. That's fine.
One more player I do want to touch on because I think some people are going to be pretty interested in him is Justin Falk. You have Justin Falk for 48 points, I have him for 45. We are pretty tight there. Yeah, 10 power play points for me, 11 for you. Uh, Hits, blocks, does all the things that you like to see. Going to get a lot of minutes regardless of whether he gets significant power play time. We're again pretty tight on the power play time. I have him for 2 minutes and 15 seconds. You have him for 2 minutes 30 seconds. So I think Justin Falk is definitely a very viable player. I just don't know that this is a player that has an
Mhm.
extreme ceiling. Even if he gets on the quote unquote top power play unit, as we've talked about, like they don't really necessarily even have a top power play unit. Maybe there's a scenario in which Berube's fired, new coach comes in, he establishes a true number one power play unit, and Justin Falk is on it. that's a case where I can see it, but I think Justin Falk might just fall into this category for me of a guy that's going to be really solid. If he's there at the end of my draft and no one else is taking him, then I'm interested. But like, would you take Bowen Byram or Justin Falk? Because I feel like that's the kind of
Mm.
player that you're going to be deciding between. And at the end of my drafts, I'm probably just going to take the upside of a guy like Bowen Byram, where in a situation like Colorado, even if he isn't on the top power play, he could have that one season where he just absolutely pops off.
Buddy, I was thinking Bowen Byram. We are this is what you call synergy right here. Okay.
Absolutely.
We're clicking on all cylinders. Yeah. I mean, for sure. I think I was gonna say he's like a poor man's Bo Byram, right? And yeah, I'd rather take Byram in that case. But don't sleep on Falk. Like this is a guy that's available
Yep.
late, right? I mean, you don't need a power play one guy because Falk does it without that, right? And there is potential, like I said, Krug's out of favor there. Like I could see Falk running power play one at some point during the season, but again, that's not really the reason you draft him, right? And he's a
Yeah.
beefer. Oh my god, yeah, hits and
Mhm.
blocks. Yes, please.
Yeah, definitely some added value in Bangers Cats for sure. Let's keep pushing it. Let's talk about Tampa Bay. Obviously, John Cooper's going to be back. He's going to have to do something pretty ludicrous to get himself fired after the back to back Stanley Cup wins that he's provided for this team. Top two lines here. I've got it with Point centering Kucherov and Hagel, and then Stamkos and Connor Sheary on Anthony Cirelli's wings. How does that sound to you, Blake? Do you think there's a chance for other players to get into this top six, or does that seem like the way it's going to go?
No, I like that a lot. I'm glad. The way my projections are showing right now, I have Stamkos on line one, but I think he performs better on line two, and that makes sense to me. So I'd like to see him on line two, but it's again potato. I think Tampa likes to load up when they need goals. They throw Stamkos back on that top line, so he'll probably split that. I think leaning a bit more with the second unit there. But yeah, I don't see anybody else jumping on there. Hagel is an interesting piece that we'll talk about in a little bit here.
Yeah, Hegel is the fourth forward that I do have on the top power play. Obviously, Kucherov, Stamkos, Point, absolute locks to be on the top power play. Hagel, the fourth forward I have there, and I do have Sergachev projected to get most of the power play time. How do you see that playing out, Blake? I think you've been a little bit vocal on some other places about how you see that playing out, so I think you might have a different take than me there.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, like how much of the power play do you see Sergachev taking? I guess I could look at your projections right here, but like what
I've Yeah, I've got Sergachev for 3 minutes, and I've got Hedman down at 2 minutes 15 seconds.
Oh God, no, that sounds terrible. Oh, please don't let that happen. All right, no, don't do Hedman like that. All right, I've got Hedman for like 2 minutes and 48 seconds, and I've got Sergachev for like 2:35 or something. So I'm kind of going off of last year. I think it'll be something similar with a little bit of a lean towards Hedman, but I think last season he just played so much hockey. He was banged up. And an interesting fact here, I've got an episode, an ADP battle that I did with Matt Larkin, and that's coming out this week. But he mentioned that he actually spoke with Victor Hedman in the offseason here, and he was saying how beat up he was. Like he was just wrecked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he actually agreed with me. We had a good conversation about Hedman, and he thinks one more year maybe for Hedman to kind of get his fantasy stock back up. And I tend to agree. I just trust what Hedman brings to the table. I know Sergachev is good to go. Like he had a great season, and Sergachev he had like a 48% power play share where Hedman had 50. So that was a surprise to me too. But yet Sergachev got 27 power play points. Hedman got 14. So I think that's going to kind of flip a little bit. I mean, Sergachev's great, but I think I want one more year with Hedman, and I'm going with the much better defenseman in real life. And I think he's a fantasy stud, and he's got one more good year left in him. I don't know. That's terrible analysis, but that's where I'm going.
No, it's definitely a situation where you almost have to tell yourself which story you believe in, for sure. Obviously, those are the toughest situations to project and where you'll get some variance in different projections. You have Hedman for 64 points and Sergachev for 57 points. Interestingly, I have it flipped, obviously, but not by much. I have Sergachev for 61 and Hedman for 58. So I actually have these guys very similar
Yeah.
in most respects. And honestly, like, it's really just about the value between the two guys. I think both of them are going to be in this high 50s to low 60s point total range at the end of the season. I do think Hedman is clearly the more talented offensive player, but you cannot discount how good that top power play unit is and how much that boosts up whoever is on it. And that's really the difference between the two with the way that I have it projected. I have Sergachev for 24 power play points and Hedman I have for exactly 16 and a half, the way the math works out there. So
Oh God,
uh,
no.
yeah, so that's the difference really for me. Otherwise, I would like I think we agree on who these players are. It's really just about the deployment there. And so tell yourself what you believe in and take a stance one way or the other, and someone will be right and someone will be wrong, I guess.
That's right.
So let's talk about Hagel. It is an interesting player. You have him for 66 points, and I have Hagel for 67. So clearly we see him fairly similarly here. You have him for 18 power play points. I have him for 17 power play points. I think honestly, like the way that they paid this guy, gave him the massive deal. Like, I don't see somebody on this squad who's really come in for that top power play role. You could say somebody like Anthony Cirelli, but he's never been given that opportunity, even when it seemed like he was the clear next guy up in the lineup. Like they've promoted just like randoms, like I think Corey Perry got up there for a while when it seemed like, just by pecking order in terms of the offensive talent, you
Yep.
would think that it would be Cirelli. So I just think this is really clearly a spot where Hagel could be a top line, top power play player for, at least like 75% of the season. And as a result, he's going to have this kind of 65-point upside.
Yeah. Brandon the Bagel Hagel. Oh my God. Fun fact: I called Bagel. I called Hagel for basically I was just shouting him out during the season. Nate kind of poo pooed that. Look who's laughing now, Nate. All right, this man got paid. All right, now just kidding. Yeah, Hagel. I keep wanting to call him Bagel now. That's
You make
ridiculous.
too many jokes and it just sticks.
Yeah, no, it's a problem. But yeah, like Kalorn, see you later. You're out of town. Who the hell is coming for Hagel's minutes? Nobody on the power play. So whether he's line one or line two, he's still going to be power play one, and he could exceed those power play numbers that we put for him, like 16 and 17. I could see him
Yep.
getting 24. I honestly could. Like if that, if they start cooking again, like yeah, it's an interesting player. I don't feel comfortable drafting him though. I don't know. It's like just drafting him for a situation, but not so much for like what's under the hood. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I don't like that. I'd rather draft the other way. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, yeah, it is an interesting point. In most cases, I would say that I'd rather bet on a player that I think has the underlying numbers to sustain himself even when he's not getting that
Right.
kind of deployment. And that was my argument against Hagel last year. And when he was not on that top line, then the production wasn't there with Hagel. You
No,
saw
we
it
don't
very
need to talk about
clearly.
that. That's fine.
Yeah, you saw it very clearly in the splits with and without, right? So that is just how you have to think about a player like this. Not an elite level player by any stretch, but a player who's capable of being very good in a complementary role. And when they get elevated to this kind of minutes, this kind of deployment, then they can be actually quite valuable for fantasy. But yeah, I mean, you'd have to obviously define a player to compare him to see who you'd rather want. But in general, I do prefer to bet on players that have better underlying numbers and a better representation of the talent that's there, even if the deployment isn't always as prime as Hagel's might be this upcoming season. So let's just talk through briefly the kind of elite three forwards here. You have Point for 86, Stamkos for 89, Kucherov for 114. I have Kucherov for 115. I have Point for 92, and I have Stamkos for 89 as well. So first off, Kucherov, I think we can sum this one up pretty clearly. His shooting percentage took a hit last year. I think he's going to get, yeah, we both have him for exactly 40 goals this year. So I think that's going to happen. I think that's just going to bounce straight back. I think a lot of those goals went Point's way this past season, and it's just the pendulum's going to swing back in Kucherov's direction. It's probably just yeah, some statistical variance for one season. So if that's a reason that you're fading Kucherov is the lower goal totals from this past season, I would say that that's a mistake. You should definitely be in on Kucherov. Still an absolute elite talent from everything under the hood in my mind. Braden Point is the one that we had the biggest difference on here. I had him for 92, as I mentioned. You have him for 86. Uh, Yeah, really, I think it's just I'm a little bit more bullish on his shots on goal. I'm a little
Mhm.
bit more bullish on the average time on ice. It's again, obviously, it's 6 points. It's not a huge
Yeah,
difference. It's just a little bit more across the board, over a half point more on ice shooting percentage. We both have them for the same even strength IPP, for a little bit more average time on ice on the power play, a little bit more of that share on the power play. So yeah, again, I don't think there's any one situation or one metric that we vastly differed on.
right.
Even the shots per 60, we were very, very close on. So I don't think there's anything here. It's just a little bit more at even strength, a little bit more on the power play, a little bit more in terms of his efficiency. That's really the difference for the two of us here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Braden Point, and I loved him last season because his ADP was stupidly low. You could get this guy at ridiculous value. You can get Braden Point at 100. 100? This
Yeah.
man scored 95 points. Damn. So that's nice. But yeah, like he redlined in a lot of metrics, his luck metrics in particular. Like his IPP was sky high, his shooting percentage, almost career high levels, right? So yeah, whenever that happens, you gotta expect regression a little bit, right? But it's interesting what you said too, like with Kucherov, yeah, most of those goals probably went points way, right? And it's an interesting way to think about fantasy and players in general. Is like who does what on each line. You know what I mean? And why does
Mm-hmm.
that work? And like you look at Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, like when they played together, or it's just interesting how like I don't even know the point I'm trying to make, but like the variance from year to year based on the type of players that are on those lines. So yeah, I don't know. Long story short, I've got Point for regressing big time. From 95 down to like 86. So, but he's still a part of that legendary power play. He got 20 power play goals last season. Good Lord. Yeah, but I like the player. His value is shot. You won't be able to get this guy at value this season.
Yep. Let's talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs now. Obviously, my favorite team, unfortunately, have been suffering not so silently for the past number of years. Yeah, definitely bemoan my fandom on this podcast a fair bit. I'm sure everyone loves to hear it every time I bring it up. Let's talk about, first off, Sheldon Keefe is back. Not something I was expecting after Kyle Dubas left, but
Mhm.
Keefe is back. I think he's obviously going to be motivated. His job is pretty clearly on the line. Perform this season or you're out, regardless of the 2-year extension he signed this offseason. I think that we shouldn't really expect anything different in terms of the regular season. We might see them try to do some things a little bit differently just to try to prepare for the playoffs a little bit differently. Maybe the new management has something to say about that. But in terms of like the system, they're not going to go out and change everything that the Leafs have been known for the last little bit. They've had obviously a lot of regular season success with what they've been doing. I don't expect that they will change much in terms of the regular season and what matters for us here in fantasy. Top lines, I think, are pretty standard for most people, at least on the top line, with Matthews centering Bertuzzi and Marner. And then I have Tavares between Domi and Nylander. I think you have Matthew Nyes up on the second line there. Just briefly for myself, Max Domi, they did say in his introductory, I don't know if it was his introductory presser, but basically Brad Treliving was talking about that they did bring him in to give them some flexibility, and he has the ability to play wing up the lineup. And so that's just how I see it playing out in the early going. I do think Matthew Nyes is quite potentially a better player than Max Domi is already, and so it wouldn't surprise me to see Nyes unseat him in the top six. But I think that if you're looking back at this after the season, that Domi probably gets the most minutes on the top six. How do you see it unfolding, Blake?
Yeah, I could absolutely see that. What you're saying makes sense. It seems like Max Domi, he needs to be on a really bad team to get deployment. That's really the only way, right? Like he goes from Chicago, like playing 20 minutes a night, to Dallas, where he's like, 14 minutes. And I think he's kind of going to get that treatment here because there's no spot really on the power. There's no spot on the power play. To me, it's a good supplemental signing. You get Tyler Bertuzzi and Max Domi in here to just shore up that top nine or the middle six, basically. And it's a great hockey trade, in my opinion. But you got Matthew Nyes out there, and he looked good. He looked
Mm-hmm.
freaking good in the playoffs. I mean, took a bad hit and he was done. But I think they're a little bit excited about Matthew Nyes, and I think they might give him some opportunity. I don't know if it'll be at the beginning, but at some point in the season, he's going to get a look in that top 6, and we'll see what we have here. But yeah, great. I'm excited about this team. Bertuzzi, Domi, Nyes, major upgrades over what they had last season.
For sure. Let's run through the power play here. I think everybody expects the same 4 forwards to be a part of it. It was obviously a very effective power play last year. Don't think they'll change much. They do lose Spencer Carberry, who was the power play coach. He's now the head coach of the Washington Capitals. But I don't think they'll change the basic system that worked so well last year. They obviously have other personnel to carry over from last year, and I think that the power play in particular is one thing that they probably will not be looking to change a whole lot. The only thing I could see happening more is they could make Matthews a little bit more of a shooter on the power play this year, just because I think they were kind of sheltering him. He obviously had some wrist problems that were pretty well documented, at least in Toronto media last year, and so I wonder if they're just kind of taking away some of his shots. It shows up in the metrics for sure. But Matthews, Marner, Tavares, Nylander, I think, are pretty locked in on the top power play. The real interest is on defense, where Morgan Rielly has historically been this guy, but there's always been some push at certain times for other players to get in there. The Leafs have tried 5 forward power plays. They've tried a few different things, and now this offseason they bring in John Klingberg, whose real only function as an NHL player at this point is as a power play quarterback in my mind, even more so than a guy like Shane Gostisbehere, who we talked about with Detroit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So my original take on the situation was that I thought that Klingberg would probably start on the top power play. I've softened on that take. I do have Rielly just ahead of Klingberg in terms of power play average time on ice. But I do think that you really can't trust Rielly as a season-long power play 1 quarterback. So that is the one player that we have the biggest difference on. We're very, very tight on these. Really, it's a small difference in the end. You have Rielly for 60 points, I have him for 55. But talk through that situation, how you see it playing out, Blake, and yeah, if you see the same kind of risk, where you'd be willing to draft Morgan Rielly this year.
Yeah, it's too bad. Like, for fantasy, I get John Klingberg, get the hell out of my sight. No, I want Rielly out there for 4 minutes. All right, but that's not going to happen, right? So they're gonna eat into each other's time. But I just think Rielly wasn't right last year. He didn't look good out there. He was laboring at times. Like, his confidence didn't look good. Like, we're just talking eye test here, but then we saw what he did in the playoffs. Like, in my opinion, he was the best player that they had besides William Nylander. He was going for it, right? And I just trust Rielly more. I think they brought in the Klingon John Klingberg as a supplementary piece. If like, it certainly doesn't help Morgan Rielly that Klingberg is there, right? Like, his leash is a little bit shorter, right? We don't, if the power play goes into a funk, like, okay, here's Klingberg, you're getting the show. And if then it starts going, maybe it's a permanent change, right? So it doesn't help. But that said, I think Morgan Rielly is the guy, and I'm treating him like the guy. I've actually projected him for career high power play numbers, like 3 minutes and 15 seconds. So nothing super insane, but I've got him for power play 1 for the season. And I think that's sort of how it's going to go. But, like I said, it's all within the range of outcomes there. Like, Klingberg's there, and he's good to go on the power play, no question.
Yeah, you have Klingberg for 44 points. I have him for 41, so we're pretty tight on that, even despite the little bit of difference that we have there. So, yeah, Klingberg, again, going to be one of these guys, maybe streamable, especially in the case where he's on the top power play, then definitely he'll get picked up because it is Toronto, and as soon as someone changes on the power play, everybody knows about it.
Yeah.
But definitely not a player that I'm looking to actually draft at the start of the season. In any pretty much any context, to be honest with you. So we've talked about that. I think the other player that's of probably the most interest is Tyler Bertuzzi here, what we could expect from him. I've heard some pretty bullish takes out there, like 70+ point takes on Tyler Bertuzzi. I cannot get there in the numbers. Yeah, I'd love to see the work that leads to Tyler Bertuzzi getting to 70 points. I just don't see that case. We saw like you saw it with Zach Hyman, you saw it with Michael Bunting. There's a role on this team for this player, and it really seems like they brought Tyler Bertuzzi in to just be the latest iteration of that player, and that player just does not get minutes in Toronto. They'll never be on the top power play, unless, yeah, again, they go to some sort of five forward kind of power play, then maybe. But you can't bank on that unless in case of injury, then obviously there's a higher ceiling there potentially. If he is the next player, like what if Matthew Nyes is absolutely tearing things up and he's the next player? That's a scenario I think could happen. I do think Tyler Bertuzzi's a talented player. He has good underlying metrics. He's going to work well at even strength. I would even venture to say that he's a better player than Michael Bunting. But even when I put this all together, I come out with 51 points in 82 games for Tyler Bertuzzi, and you have him for 53. So obviously you saw it pretty similarly. Talk to me about Bertuzzi. Do you think that 70 points is even a realistic possibility in this setup? That's obviously quite a variance from our baseline projection here.
Yeah, no, hell no. First, how's it going to happen? You know what I mean? The numbers don't make sense, right? If you just look at deployment. So there's no spot on power play 1. So he's getting, I projected him for 2 minutes. He might even get less than 2 minutes average, power play time on ice, right? So he might get less there. I've got him for 10 power play points and no shorthanded time, right? Because they have people to do that already in Toronto. So he's not needed there. He's just going to be an even strength warrior, and he's going to be a good one, right? But the thing about Bertuzzi and Domi and now Nyes, like, he's coming up through the system, but these guys are supplementary pieces. They're like, they went out and got these guys so that if players go down, it's next man up. Like Tyler Bertuzzi's next man up on the power play. Like if William Nylander goes down, you got Tyler Bertuzzi. It's not that bad. You know what I mean? They can make that work. And I think that's why those guys are there. And you look at teams that are successful in the playoffs, they have just a stable of studs that they can just roll out there into that position. And that's what Bertuzzi and Domi are to me. But for right now, like you said, they're just slotting him into that position that was held by the bunt cake Michael Bunting. And I think he's gonna do very well in that role. But 70 points, no. I mean, how's that going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll just touch briefly on our projections. We're pretty tight on these. As I mentioned, we both have Austin Matthews for 111 points. Both have him over 60
Yes, sir.
goals. We have Marner for 107 for me, 108 for you. You have Tavares for 81. I have Tavares for 76. You have Nylander for 89. I have him for 87. We're very tight across the board here. I think this is honestly one of the more predictable teams in the entire league, given you have the same coaching situation, a lot of the same players, very clearly defined roles for a lot of the top players. I think it's a pretty safe projection for most of these players. We might be a little bullish compared to other projections on the top end guys there with Matthews and Marner. But honestly, I think if Matthews is fully healthy, like the season where he scored 60 goals, it really felt like that was the season that he truly came into his own, and where like all the metrics started to kind of level off, and like this is the player he is now. And then last year was obviously fairly injury riddled, and wrist issues. Maybe that's something that doesn't just go away with the treatment that he had, but maybe there is a downside case from this that you can project, but the upside case is just so remarkable that it's a risk I feel you have to take early in the first round of your drafts. And then I will say Max Domi, we both have for 41 points, if you're curious about that one. All right. We are halfway through the projections here, the teams for this particular episode. But as I alluded to before, we do have another giveaway to do here. We have another 5 Dauber giveaways to do with the Fantasy Guide, the Ultimate Fantasy Prize Pack, I believe it's called. So definitely something that we've done before earlier this offseason, something we're doing again now with help from those guys over at Dauber. They reached out and wanted to give us a few more to give away. Definitely something you're going to want to get into your life. So the criteria, I guess, to be considered for this particular giveaway is we're just looking for some subscriptions on our YouTube channel. So go over to YouTube, type in Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey. You'll definitely find us there, and throw us a subscription. Send me a DM somewhere, or just tweet it to me on Twitter, whatever works easiest for you. Get it to me somehow. Get me that screenshot of you being subscribed to Apples and Genos on YouTube, and we will enter you into the Dauber giveaway. All right. You ready to keep going with this, Blake?
Oh, I'm ready. Oh my God, what a salesman! First off, like, damn, you got honey in your voice tonight, Nate. What the hell's going on?
I don't know. Maybe I'm just perfecting my giveaway pitch after doing it last week and getting right back into the swing of things this week. Maybe I'm just getting good at this.
Sheesh, this guy's jacking you up. Oh my God, let's continue.
All right, we got to talk about your team now, Blake. We got to
Oh,
talk about the Vancouver Canucks. We have Rick Tocchet back behind the bench after he took over mid-season last year. Uh, I don't know if you want to say anything in particular about Rick Tocchet. I think that he's probably going to let this play out similar to what we saw when he was behind the bench towards the end of last year. Do you want to say anything about Tocchet as a coach and what that might mean for fantasy?
yeah, this is going to be a good thing for the Vancouver Canucks. No question. I mean, obviously, I'm a homer. I like the Vancouver Canucks. All right. I live here. But, as a Canucks fan, too, I'm tortured. And Nate, you can relate to this as a Leafs fan. But every year they do this to me, I feel optimistic again. And I just think Tocchet is a big reason, right? Like, say what you want to say, like, about Bruce Boudreau and the way he was sort of, unceremoniously let go. Like, that sucked. But the truth is, he was a bad coach. And I can't sugarcoat that. Like, this guy was out there, doing like read based systems, right? Like, oh, just do what you think you should do. Okay. And that's, and I've mentioned this before. That's why you see, pictures of like 4 Canucks going against one guy behind the net. It's like, guys, the reads aren't good. All right. We need a little bit of structure here. Right. And that's what Tocchet's bringing. He's bringing in X's and O's. He's bringing a more progressive mentality. Like Bruce Boudreau, love the guy, very old school, very much like, get out there and do it. Do your best, dropping F-bombs all over the place. Where Tocchet is like, he's looking at the science of the game, right? He's brought in like Sergei Gonchar, Adam Foote. These are, for defenseman coaching, and it's going to be good. I really think there's a lot more structure, and that's going to equal a better defensive environment for sure for the Canucks, and that's going to lead to more offense, in my opinion.
Awesome. A glowing endorsement of the
Love
Canucks
it.
for this season. Top 2 lines here. I have Pettersson between Beauvillier and Kuzmenko, and then Miller between Mikheyev and Besser. How do you see that playing out, Blake?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That's kind of what they were going with, at the end of the season. So I think, yeah, Beauvillier will get that run at the start there. He played pretty well. A good supplemental piece to those guys.
For sure. Top power play, I think Pettersson and Miller and Quinn Hughes on the back end are absolute locks. And then you could persuade me that the other 2 spots are a little bit more up in the air. I think Kuzmenko has probably played his way into a role in that top power play at this point. But Brock Besser for Beauvillier, one of those 2 guys would be there. I'm projecting it for Brock Besser fairly conclusively, I guess I would say. I do have Besser for 3 minutes average time on ice. How do you see that particular scenario playing out, Blake?
Yep, I've got the same. I've got Besser for just under 3, and then Beauvillier for like 2 minutes and 35 or something like that. So, yeah, those are the 2 moving pieces for sure. Like, depending on performance, really, during the season.
Sure. So let's talk about the defensemen first before we dig into the specifics of the forwards. Obviously, Quinn Hughes, one of these guys who's just going to score a ton of points and a ton of power play points in particular. I feel like I've said this about a lot of defensemen, but one of the better power play quarterbacks across the league. Maybe, as I mentioned before, there's just a lot of just a significant amount of solidified top power play defensemen across the league at this point,
Yep.
and it's just kind of driving that standard higher across the league. I am a little bit interested in Philip Hronek, though. Like, we both have Hughes for really big point projections. You have him
Yep.
for 81 points with 9 goals. I have him for 8 goals and 76 points. Not going to quibble over that small difference there, but Philip Hronek is a guy that I'm actually kind of interested in. I have him for 43 points. You have him for 38, so you're a little less bullish than I am. Talk to me about what you think Hronek's role might be on the team next year, at least at even strength, because we know he's not getting that top power play.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's hard for me to kind of extrapolate, right? Like, because you look at the situation he had in Detroit, and that's not the situation that he's going to have here. Because like for a lot of the time in Detroit, he was getting top power play over Mo Seider, which was driving his amazing output that he had. And to be honest, I don't really trust that output. I don't think he's that player. I think it was kind of like a Hampus Lindholm situation, or Dmitry Orlov, like these guys are flying, but it's like it doesn't make sense. He's kind of on a hot streak, and that said, like it's going to be a great addition for the Canucks, and I've got him for 9 goals. Like he shoots at a decent level for defenseman. I think he's going to play some big minutes, but definitely not a player I'm saying I'm excited about. Like in terms of fantasy, right? I'm excited that he's on the Canucks because I think first off they gave up a lot for him, so they're going to have to play him, right? And
Mm-hmm.
but he's bringing the B for stats. I've got him for 110 hits and 90 blocks, right? So he could be 100 and 100 guy for periffs, so that's nice. And then throw 40 points on top of that. It's pretty darn good. Like let's say your last defenseman for your draft, like you could do a lot worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually like Hronik in terms of the talent. The underlying numbers are actually pretty solid. The thing that I really like about Hronik for this year in particular is the rest of the defensemen over there in Vancouver. Carson Soucy, Ian Cole, Christian Wayne, Tyler Myers. Like, I don't know that someone's really going to push Hronik for the minutes here. Like, there's a scenario in my mind where he eclipses, like, I have him for 23 and a half minutes. You have him for just under that, but above 23 as well. Like, there's a scenario in which he's also playing like 25 minutes, right up there with Quinn Hughes, just a little bit more of obviously a secondary role on the power play. So that's what has me interested in Hronik. And then also, just the next man up factor of it.
Yeah.
If anything were to happen to Quinn Hughes, if he were to get injured at any point, then I think it would be Hronik's show on the top power play. And I think he'd show out quite
Yeah.
well on that top power play as well. So he does kind of have that contingent upside that is actually really, really solid, which you don't necessarily see with a lot of the secondary defensemen on teams across the league. So that's got me a little bit interested in Hronik. Definitely somebody to keep an eye on in deeper leagues, and then just on watch lists in general. Let's talk about the differences in our projections. So Pedersen, a guy that I'm pretty low on, I would say, probably relative to consensus across most projections that I've managed to get my eyes on. At least I have him for 87 points. I started out at 85. I did bump him up a couple points after Blake implored me, basically begged me to think of the children here and give Elias Pettersson his due. Blake, you have him for 92, so it's not like you're projecting, him to go right back to where he was last season either. Talk to me about Pettersson and why you've got him where you've got him here.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, by the way, for moving that projection. All right. I can't stand for any Pedersen disrespect. All right. We don't do that here at Apples and Ginos. All right. It's a family program. But yeah, I looked at Elias Pettersson, his season last year, and one of the main things that happened was he started shooting a lot more, right? His shots on goal per 60 at even strength went up from 6.73 in 2021 to 8.65. So that's significant, right? Because he was kind of in that 6 to 7 range, right? And then he boosted it right up to 8.65. So that's up there. But one thing we'll talk about here is Pettersson's IPP at even strength was ridiculous. Like, top 5 in the league. We looked up here. He was cooking at 85% IPP. My God. So what I did when I projected him, I regressed that because that's basically as high as you can have. Like he's not going to do that again. But I regressed it down to 78%, which is still ludicrous. All right. That's a really high IPP. But that said, I mean, based on watching this guy and, the way that he's deployed in Vancouver here, like everything runs through him. He's the man, right? He's the man on the power play, whereas IPP is a little lower, but at even strength, he's an amazing rusher, chances off the rush, shots off the rush. And obviously his shot is elite. So, my main thing with Pettersson only having 92 points is Tocchet has said that he doesn't want to use JT Miller and Pettersson on the penalty kill, right? Where Pettersson he led the league. Both those guys led the league with 9 shorthanded points. So I basically baked in, like, get those out of here, right? And it ended, his numbers ended up at 92. But everything else I saw with Pettersson, his shooting percentage every other metric really is kind of in line with career numbers, right? It's just his IPP went ballistic and he upped his shots. So I think that is sustainable in my opinion. All right. What say you, Nate?
Well, I have him for 16.3% shooting percentage, and you have him for 15.2. So I would say I'm more bullish on the shooting
Oh, okay.
percentage.
All right. That's nice.
It's really more about the IPP here. You have him for Just looking at even strength numbers here, you have him for 78% IPP, and I have him for 69%, which is obviously a fairly significant difference. So that's the one that is the biggest driver of all of this. I did have him for more shorthanded stuff, so definitely I have him more on the shorthanded, less on the even strength, and that's kind of how it shakes out. I yeah, just in general, kind of regressed him back a little bit harder than you did. You have him for 9.2 shots per 60. You're obviously leaning a lot more into this past season than I am, where he took a massive step across the board there. So if he can sustain that, then obviously he'll be closer to your projection than mine. My thing is, I've seen this with some players in the past. Whether Pettersson fits that mold or not is up for debate, but I've seen this with some players in the past where they take a massive step in one season and then they take just a slight step back and find a new normal in the following season. It's a little bit, probably a little bit subjective on my part to make that call, but I think you are just kind of by definition being a little bit subjective whenever you see a player take a massive step. Do you believe in
Yep.
that step? Yes, the underlying numbers were really good and bore out a lot of this production, but how much of that step will be there again next season? There's a lot of factors that can go into that. So until we see a couple of seasons, a long stretch of time at a certain level, then it's hard to say 100% which way we're going to go in the future. So that's just kind of my case for it. Obviously, a little more bearish, and would not be honestly surprised if he went for 95 plus. That wouldn't surprise me. It would just be that he kind of was able to sustain this new level of production that he showed last year.
Tisk tisk, Nate. What the hell? What are you doing? Come on, EP40, get him in your life. All right, there you go.
All right, let's talk about Andrei Kuzmenko. You have Kuzmenko for 67 points. I have Kuzmenko for 62 points. You have him sustaining a fair amount of that extreme 27% plus shooting percentage. You have him up at 19.8%. I regressed him back down to 16.3%, which obviously is a big difference in our projections here. Yeah, go ahead, Blake. Talk to me about Kuzmenko and why you think he's going to have one of the greatest shooting percentages in the league once again this year.
Big Kuzi! Oh, come on. I got him under 20%, Nate. What more do you want from me? All right. Damn it. All right. He had 27%. All right. We've heard the conversation. Damn, no, he's not going to get 27%, but players consistently get, 19%. I've got him for 19.8%. And the truth is, this is based on what I've watched as well. Like, the chances and the goals that Kuzmenko scored last season, they're freaking tap-ins. It's ridiculous. Like, first off, on the power play, ludicrous. I mean, he's got his stick on the ice and Pettersson's just whipping it off his stick. Like, I swear I saw that like 6 times. All his chances are in high danger areas. So, a high shooting percentage, I think he's going to be a high conversion guy for his career, right? Like Baby Dry, right? I think he's kind of in that zone. He's not the same player as Baby Dry, right? I'm not saying that, right? Because this guy doesn't shoot, right? Because Kuzmenko, buddy, you got to shoot the puck. But I do think that the shooting percentage is going to be efficient throughout his career, like 16 to 20% efficient, probably every season, right? So I've got him at the high end, 19.8, but come on, damn it. I took it down from 27%. So that said, I did what I said I was going to do. I really do think that he's a bigger part of this offense. I think that he's a key to Pettersson basically staying here. He's Pettersson's guy. They're kind of locked at the hip, and I think that's how it's going to be this season. And that's never going to be a bad thing, right? This guy's going to get buku chances based on some awesome Pettersson passes. And I think he's going to shoot a little bit more and get a little more time on ice. So that's, 67. I still think that's a little high. I think we're probably bookending, right? I could absolutely see a 62-point Kuzmenko season, and I wouldn't bat an eye, right? That makes sense. But I think he's going to be a really valuable player for the Canucks this year.
Yeah, so I dug into some of Kuzmenko's KHL stats to check
Oh,
back
no.
on this shooting percentage. He shot 14.7% across 315 KHL games before obviously coming over. So in my mind, I added 1.5% just because he does play with guys like Pettersson, and that obviously can raise the bar for anyone, basically. So in my mind, I was being pretty generous. I don't think Kuzmenko is like a Draisaitl level shooter up in that level. I just have a really tough time believing that even if he is getting a ton of tap ins, just repeatedly year after year for the rest of his career. I just find that really hard to believe. That would be a prototype of a player that I legitimately have not seen in the NHL in the number of years that I've been doing projections. So that's just why it's hard to believe for me, and why I'd regress him as much as I did. So
Erroneous, Nate. All right, damn it. Come on.
let's talk about the other forwards here just a little bit more briefly, obviously. But JT Miller, you have for 88 points. You have Beauvillier for 51 points. You have Besser for 66 points. If I look over to mine, I have Miller for 87 points, so pretty consistent there. Beauvillier, I have for 46 points, so a little less bullish there. And I have Brock Besser for 61 points, so a tiny bit less than you as well there. But Brock Besser, I think, like JT Miller, I think he kind of is what he is. He should be in this point per game plus. We all know he's going to hit a lot. He's going to be a multi category contributor for your fantasy teams. I feel like people have a pretty good idea of what to expect from JT Miller, even though last year was a bit up and down for sure, especially with some off ice things going on there in Vancouver. Brock Besser is the more interesting player in my mind. What to make of him? I really think it comes down to this power play, and if he does get on it and stay on it. If he does, then I definitely see the bull case for 65 to 70 points for Brock Besser. He's obviously had his own tumultuous behind the scenes things going on the last number of years. And I do think this is a talented player. You saw kind of proof of his ability in the early going, and then he hasn't quite been able to reclaim it the last couple of years. So I do think that there's definitely a ceiling for Brock Besser that could be unlocked this season. What do you think about Besser in particular, Blake?
Yeah, I love to hear this, buddy. Besser is someone I'm excited about this season, no question. I think he's a 30 and 30 guy, and that's a great season for Brock Besser. 30 and 30, I'm loving that. And Besser would love that, and the fans here would love that. This guy's a sniper for sure. And just imagine, like, for the last 4 years, this guy's been dealing with like his sick father with like, a terminal illness. Like, and go out and try and play hockey. Like, no, so his father's passed away. So, I've read some interviews with Besser. And first, another thing that I love about Besser, he literally went to the GM, Patrick Alvin, and was like, at the trade deadline, like, don't trade me. Please don't trade me. Like, I want to be here. Like, and he likes, like, he was refreshed when Talkett got here. And so I just like stuff like that. To me, like, mentally, this guy's going to be a completely different player mentally, right? And his offseason training, I read something about that. He's tried something different, and he got a new guy in there. And like, there's a lot of things stacked in Besser's favor. And all that he needs to do to have that go well for me is have 60 points. And I think that's totally reasonable. So I'm excited about that. I think 30 goals is a lock, and he's a player that you can get really late in drafts, like really late. And he's a right winger, so positional scarcity as well. I've got Besser in a bunch of spots.
Yep. Absolutely agree with all that. Let's talk about the Vegas Golden Knights, the returning Stanley Cup champions here. Bruce Cassidy obviously going to be back after that season, one of the best coaches across the league for sure, and definitely think we're going to get a pretty close repeat of what we saw from Vegas in terms of what they'll do on the ice this year. So it feels like a safe projection from that standpoint, at least. I have the obvious top line returning Eichel, Barbashev, Marchessault, and then I have Stevenson with Stone, and then maybe Brett Howden. You could tell me a lot of stories about who might get onto the second line left wing spot there. There's definitely room there for someone to assert themselves from the prospect pool, from the bottom six. Lots of opportunity, I think, and maybe somebody locks onto that, and that'll actually be some spot to watch on this team next year. The top power play I have as Eichel, Marchessault, Stevenson, Stone, and Theodore. Theodore versus Pietrangelo is the obvious conversation on the top power play. How do you see this power play shaking out? Do you see the same five there? Would you put Pietrangelo there? Do you have a different forward in mind?
No, yeah, I agree with you on the power play deployment there, and it's one of those situations too where it's not exactly like a certified number one power play defenseman. Like, I could see them sort of kind of cannibalizing each other's minutes there. I think I've got, Theodore for 2 minutes and 45, and I've got Pietrangelo for like 2 minutes and 30 or 2 minutes and 25. So it's kind of that situation, right? And I think they get bounced back and forth, but I do think Theodore's the guy.
Yep. Yeah, I have it very similar. So we projected that almost identically between those two defensemen. That does come out to, for you, 59 points for Shea Theodore and 55 for Petrangelo. For me, that comes out to 57 for Theodore and 49 for Petrangelo. Both of them definitely going to be relevant again for
Yep.
fantasy. You're probably going to be a little bit frustrated with both of them at different points throughout the season, but at the end of the season for where you're getting them, you're probably going to be satisfied if you look back in totality at the end of the season. So it's a little bit about your appetite for the week to week ups and downs of those two players for sure. Um, the those are really honestly the two defensemen to watch for here. Alec Martinez definitely has some relevance in Banger Cats, where his block numbers are always just out of this world. Braden McNabb, also a big hitter, blocker, kind
Beefer.
of. Yes, that is the
Uh,
correct term to use.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Braden McNabb is a beefer and definitely someone that I've streamed on some Vegas back to backs when I needed to catch up in the peripheral categories. So that's really the defense core that you're looking at there. The biggest difference in our projections was Jonathan Marchessault. You have him for 74, and I have him for 66. Talk to me about Marchessault and what drives the 74 for you.
Yeah, I mean, quite simply, like I think it's just the full season of top line, top power play for March or so. I think that's not. He was still kind of dinking around on the third line there, sometimes the second line, but obviously just won the Conn Smythe. I think there could be a letdown for sure for March or so as well, right? Just the Stanley Cup hangover for the whole team. I can't even believe this team won the Stanley Cup. Like, what the hell? You're looking at this team, like, oh my God, I mean, great players. Obviously, what they did worked, great coaching, but damn. Yeah, I've got Marchessault for 36 goals and 38 assists. Yeah, that's a bullish projection. Oh my God. But I like the shot generation, the chance generation for Marchessault. That's something I trust. And if I'm, great shot and chance generation plus buku minutes with Jack Eichel, and then on the top power play as well. I think it's just as simple as that. I don't know what the differences are in our kind of projections there. How did you see Marchessault?
Yeah, I was just kind of double checking some of those on the fly here. The biggest one that I'm seeing here, we have them for the same even strength IPP, 70%, which is a really good number.
Mm-hmm.
The on ice shooting percentage looks to be the biggest difference. You have them for 10.25, I have them for 9.25. So that's obviously a fairly significant decrease. We see them as a pretty similar power play role. You have them for 23 points, I have them for 21. So pretty close there. It's more so about the on ice shooting
Mm-hmm.
percentage. Which, yeah, I just have them a little lower down. Really, honestly, everything else is quite
Yeah.
similar between the two of us. You have them for a few more shots, which helps obviously, but yeah, it looks like that's the biggest thing here is you're projecting just a better offensive environment overall for him. Um, the rest of the forward group here we should touch on. I think the one that people are also going to be pretty interested in is Jack Eichel. You have him for 79 points. I have him for 78. I feel like Eichel is a guy that everybody talks about as a superstar level player, a guy who like should be considered a 90, 95 point player. I just don't think he is that player. Uh, it really hasn't been borne out in the underlying stats at really any point in his career. He did have a good season last year, but he's never been a high efficiency player.
Mm-hmm.
And the big season that he did have in Buffalo was a season where he just had ridiculous minutes, was kind of the only thing going in Buffalo, and they rode him. And he's good enough to make it happen on his own in those scenarios. He's just not a player who's ever been able to like really take it to the next level and have greater efficiency based on players around him. I also don't think that Vegas honestly has like extremely talented players to put around him, right? Like there's no Mitch Marner on Eichel's wing here who could potentially raise his ceiling beyond what it is naturally. So a few different factors there, but yeah, I just think that people need to reframe what they think Jack Eichel is for fantasy purposes. And to me, that's just a close to a point per game player. Definitely a good player, but definitely not someone that you really have to prioritize in your drafts, especially as a center only player.
Yeah, I think this is the player that Eichel is right now on his current team. Like maybe Eichel on a different team where he has more of a role. Like obviously he has a great role here with Vegas, but I mean, 18 minutes, 40 seconds, 46 seconds average time on ice last season, under 3 minutes on the power play last season, only 14 power play points, right? Like, that's just the way Vegas does it. They're like kind of Seattle light. They just roll out a bunch of lines, and the power plays are changing all the time. And now this guy's got a Stanley Cup ring, for God's sake. But yeah, I just don't trust that. If he gets those buku minutes, yeah, we could see 90-point Jack Eichel, but I just don't see that happening here in Vegas.
Yep. Yeah, just touching briefly on the other players, we have Barbashev, somewhere between 45 and 50 points is the probable projection there throughout a full season. Obviously, a player who hits a lot, so if that's valuable in your leagues, you can definitely consider that. Don't think there's a high offensive ceiling for this player, just a guy who pretty much doesn't shoot. Another guy who doesn't shoot, Chandler Stevenson, but yet he still gets 60-ish points every single year and will probably do so again. Very efficient, like a great setup player. Oddly reminiscent of Nicholas Backstrom to me. Backstrom, obviously a higher level talent in his prime than Chandler Steven ever has been or ever will be, most likely. But I do think Stevenson has some of that kind of game where he's never going to be a guy who scores a ton of goals. You have him for 17, I have him for 20. Never going to be a guy who scores a ton of goals, but he's definitely going to be a guy who racks up assists and power play assists in particular. Mark Stone, this is one case I think it's worth mentioning that it's a player that I am baking in a lot of injury risk for in my personal drafts. I still projected him for 82 games just because I project every player for 82 games. But when you have these kind of chronic issues that you see with a guy like Stone, that's where it starts to be a concern for me. When it's a clear chronic issue, the same issue is flaring up and causing him issues year after year, that's a concern for me. So definitely, I think Stone is a terrific player. I have him for a 77-point projection, so I definitely believe in the talent still. It's more so about, can you really trust this player to stay healthy? Will he be, maybe they give him less minutes to try to manage some of that. That's a possibility in my mind as well. Yeah, there's just a lot of risk with a player with this kind of chronic injury history. So, contrary to what we normally say about fading injury risk, I think this is one player where you do have to consider that risk. Anybody else here that you want to touch on, Blake, before we move on?
No, Vegas is not an exciting fantasy team at all. Like,
No.
Chandler Stevenson, I've got him for 61 points. He might be on the wire at times during the year, and you're picking up Chandler Stevenson. Like, God, that's freaking terrible. I don't know. Brett Howden, I'm interested to see if he does get a top 6 role, like what that looks like, right? But top 6 in Vegas doesn't mean a hill of beans. All right. It's not an exciting place to be. I mean, I've got William Karlsson here for 51 points, so that he's serviceable, but he's streamer level. So yeah, nothing blowing my hair back, that's for sure.
Definitely. So let's move on and talk about the Washington Capitals here. As I mentioned before, Spencer Carberry, the new coach here, as I mentioned, was credited for revamping the power play and making that power play really, really effective. So it'll be very interesting to see if he can have a similar positive effect on the Washington power play this year. Maybe they don't just pass it to Ovechkin every single time to let him bomb away, and maybe they try to be a little bit more variable with things. I don't know. We will see this season if he kind of dabbles in the power play and makes it his own the way he did with the Leafs. I want to say, too, while I'm talking about this, so Carberry takes over for Peter Laviolette, and I misspoke on the last episode when I said that Laviolette was the coach for the Rangers last year, which was completely false and untrue. So definitely you can throw out what I was saying about Laviolette there. I don't honestly know where that came from in my brain, but I had it in my head that Laviolette was there last year. So just want to clear the air on that one.
I think I actually agreed with you on that, Nate. So I'm going to
Yeah.
take the hit on that. I think I was like, yeah. And then I was like, I don't think he was, but I don't know. We're live. I don't know what the hell's going on. Yeah, there you go.
So let's dig into Washington, though, here. It is a bit of an odd situation. The team is aging. They've kind of paid their guys for their service. this is going to be a weird situation regardless with Evgeny Kuznetsov, who I do have as the top line center currently between Ovechkin and Wilson. Kuznetsov has been the subject of trade rumors, seemed like he kind of quiet quit on the team at times last year. And then I have Strome between Oshie and then Pacioretty when he is back. We do know that he's not going to be ready for the start of the season, and obviously multiple torn Achilles. That is a very serious injury to have, and to have multiple times now. So definitely won't be back to start the season, but definitely interested in him when he is. Is that how you see the top six here, Blake? Would you put anybody else up in there?
Yeah, I mean, I've got Kuznetsov as the number one center, but it's a short leash. I think Dylan Strome is knocking on the door and could potentially boot that man if he comes out just acting like a dingus. Nose candy. All right. No, we don't need that. So yeah, I like Dylan Strome there maybe, but Kuzi for sure for the start.
All right, let's talk about the power play. Obviously, Ovechkin's going to be on there. Obviously, John Carlson is a player that we both believe in on the back end. I've heard a lot of people talking about how Rasmus Sandin is going to unseat John Carlson on the top power play just because Sandin had a good run when he was traded over while Carlson was injured. As soon as Carlson came back, it was his job again. This is a franchise defenseman who performs at an absolutely elite level, a guy that shows up as like a top five fantasy defenseman for me in a lot of formats that I've checked out so far. This is not a scenario in which I'm worried about Rasmus Sandin unseating John Carlson. I think they are worlds apart in terms of offensive talent. I don't think Rasmus Sandin is a bad player, but I do not think that he holds a candle to John Carlson as an offensive talent. So, not something that I am particularly worried about personally. Now, the other players on this top power play, I definitely think you can create some arguments. I have it with Strome, Backstrom, and Pacioretty when healthy being on the top power play. Probably you would say Kuznetsov is that guy while Pacioretty is not healthy. How would you see this power play playing out, Blake? Is there anybody else you'd throw into that conversation?
Yeah, I think I put Wilson in there just because of you know, the contract that he just signed, right? Like, and it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean that he's going to get power play one, but I think they might be starting to lean into this guy a little bit. Like he's younger than a lot of these guys, right? They've paid him like a good amount of money and term. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a mishmash because they're all getting access to Ovechkin, but yeah, I could see Tom Wilson kind of moonlighting on power play one there, instead of maybe Kuznetsov or Strome, something like that.
Yeah. I will say TJ Oshie had a lot of minutes there
Mhm.
last year as well and did okay with it. Oshie's just not a player that I'm going to get excited about at this stage in his career, but definitely they do have options after kind of the top two that we both see of Ovechkin and Carlson. I would agree that Strome seems like a guy. If anyone's gonna, kind of exceed expectations from this group, Strome would be that guy for me. You have him for 59 points. I have him for 60 points. We're very tight on that. So I just think that, another year into a situation a little more established. Spencer Carberry, if he can do some things for the power play, and Strome is a big part of that and becomes a little bit more of a setup man for Ovechkin and
Mhm.
Carlson. I could see some scenarios in which Strom really does have a bit of a breakout season this year
Yep.
and eclipses 70 points. I will say, though, that Nicholas Backstrom, the one thing that this man still does extremely well is play on the power play. So um, it's hard to discount that Backstrom, for whatever he's worth at this stage in his career, he is probably a guy where he's best suited to wielding his craft on the power play. And he might be a player who gets a lot more touches of the puck by design just by virtue of the fact that he's been one of those core members for so long and a big part of all their high end teams. So it's hard to kind of weigh that and kind of parse through exactly what this is going to look like. But I do think that there's some opportunity here for some players to exceed expectation. And so it is something you should think about for yourself, at least what you believe in. So let's talk about the actual point projections for Carlson and Sandine. You have Carlson for 63. I have him for 72. So obviously, I'm a little bit higher on him. Sandine, you have for 45, and I have for 38. So it's not like we're totally writing Sandine off either. Do think that he's probably going to get some minutes there. You have him for about 22 and a half, and I have him for just under 21. So we both do see him getting some minutes. He's going to contribute peripherally, hits and decent blocks, not incredible blocks. Talk to me about the difference here. Like 63 is still a legitimate projection for
Yeah.
Carlson for sure, but you do have him less than I do. What do you see with Carlson here?
I think it's more just like you mentioned right off the bat. It's kind of the aging team, right? And this guy's coming off a very significant injury. I mean, granted, he should be good to go. Like he was good to go at the end of last season, but I don't know. He's just another year older, and you do have Sandine in the wings. Like I respect what you were saying, and I agree with it for sure. But Sandine is good to go. He's good to go right there. He's shown that he can run that power play. So I didn't bake in Sandine taking any of Carlson's minutes. That's for sure. A 63 is still good. I just don't see 70. Oh man. I don't even really have a good reason for it, to be honest. Like last year, his point pace was 59. And he had that big injury. So it's more about the decline in Washington than it is really about Carlson as a player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just looking through to see what we have as differences between the two players. A little bit just just the efficiency, basically. The IPP is the
Yep.
big one. You have Carlson at 61% on the power play. I have him at 65%. At even strength, I have Carlson at 50%. You have him at 41%. So that's the biggest difference for sure,
Right.
where I definitely regressed him back towards his career numbers, and you tended to believe in some of the later, the last year's stats, it appears here. So, yeah, I guess take from that what you will as the listener. But for me, I just think that Carlson, yeah, I mean, even if he is a 63-point player and not a 72-point player, still a elite level offensive defenseman in the league.
Well, one thing just before we move on from Carlson, Nate, this is a guy I think you can get at value, right? Because there might be guys
For
thinking
sure.
out there like me, right? Like, 63 points is still like if he pops for 70, that's like you said, it's a top five, almost a top five defenseman. It could be potentially in this. So definitely look for Carlson after some of those top tier guys go. I think that's going to be a value play for sure.
Absolutely. Um, let's talk about the last team here. We're to the last team. It is Winnipeg. On the coaching side, somehow it is Rick Bowness behind the bench once again, even after he just basically put his entire team on blast and appeared to almost like sign his own exit
Meltdown.
papers in his final um, press interview there. But yeah, somehow he's back, and apparently everybody's all great with this again. I really find that hard to believe, but regardless, that's what we've got. And so, at least for the early going, while he's still in town, we can expect that we're going to see something somewhat similar to what we saw last year in terms of deployment and overall team structure. The top two lines, I have Shifley between Connor and Cole Perfetti, and then Vilardi between Ehlers and Iafallo. Do you see it any differently there, Blake?
That is sort of how I see it. I've actually got Shifley, Ehlers, and Connor on line one, and then second line I've got Nemenstikov, so which is a guy that I'm kind of low key just interested in. Nemenstikov, Perfetti, and Vilardi on the second line. So I kind of went a different way with it.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the power play. Obviously, a lot of those guys will show up on the power play here. The way that I am looking at it currently, I'm not sure that Ehlers is going to get on that top power play. I kind of wanted to just project away from it a little bit. In the end, like I do still end up with Ehlers at 3 minutes average time on ice on the power play. But if I'm calling the units for opening day at this particular juncture, I have it Shifley, Connor, Vilardi, Perfetti, and Morrissey. I think Shifley, Connor, Morrissey are absolute locks. And then after that, it's a little bit more of a crapshoot. I'm starting to believe, just based on what we've seen out of Winnipeg the last number of years, that there is something to this theory that Ehlers just would rather be on the second power play unit, that like he and Shifley like play the same spot or like want to be in the same spot. And so like Shifley just wins because I don't know why everybody likes Mark Shifley so much, but apparently he's the person that should get those minutes and not Nikolai Ehlers. Either way, I still have a very bullish projection on Nikolai
Yep.
Ehlers, 79 points. You have Ehlers for 77, so you see a pretty similar situation there overall. Talk to me about how you see the power play unfolding, and talk to me about Ehlers a little bit.
Well, I'm going down with the ship with Ehlers. I'm taking him on PP1. All right, come on, get out of here, Mark. No. How could they do this again? They like, regardless of where he plays, like, give the man more minutes. Like, this is such an efficient player, such an amazing shot and chance generator. And his IPP is ridiculous. Like, he's just a beauty. He's a beauty for fantasy, and he helps the team win on the ice. So it never made sense to me, this like 16-minute treatment of Nikolai Ehlers. So hopefully Rick Bowness does the right thing. I think they have to find a way to make that work. But yeah, something stinks in Winnipeg for sure. Like, Mark Scheifele wants out. I'm sure, I think he'll probably get traded at some point in the season. Stripping the captaincy of Blake Wheeler, I hated that. That sucks. Just the way they did it too. And then, yeah, what Rick Bowness did at the end of the season there, where he's kind of just laying into his players. That's not good coaching, in my opinion. So that said, I like Ehlers for power play one. I've got him for, I don't know, let me see. 22 power play points. Did you bake in, like, what was your power play time on ice for Ehlers?
Yeah, 3 minutes average time on ice on the power play. So definitely a healthy number in the end, regardless. Like, he's always going to be the next guy up. He's always going to be the first guy over the boards for the second unit. Like, I still think he gets to that 3 average time on ice by the end of the season. So yeah, I do think that he probably gets the minutes. It's just about who he gets those minutes with, right? Like,
Right.
is he actually going to get the Connor exposure? Is he going to get the Shifley exposure that he really needs to just have elite power play totals? That I'm not so sold on. So let's talk about the kind of peripheral members of that power play, I guess you could call them, the Vilardis, Perfettis, anybody else that you might see getting up there. You have Perfetti for 48 points and Vilardi for 57 points. I have Perfetti for 57 points and Vilardi for 47 points. So we almost have these two players basically reversed. So yeah, why don't you start? Talk to me about the roles that you see for these players, both on this power play and at even strength.
Yeah. If I'm going with Ehlers on power play one, then one of those guys is getting bumped off, and I chose Vilardi as the guy that stays on power play one. So that's going to make a difference in the projections as well. But something else just with Vilardi, I think he's more established. He's more of an established player. They wanted him. They brought him in. Like, they traded out a pretty good asset to get this guy, right? So I think they think highly of him, and I think they have to give him a chance to kind of show what he can do, right? And something that I like about Vilardi is that he's efficient. He's an efficient shooter. He's not a great shooter, but he's efficient. And I think, he showed that at times last season in LA. Like, yeah, he had a really good stretch there where he was just pumping points, especially the first half of the season there. So I think they're going to give him a longer look. Cole Perfetti is still, he only has 69 games in the league. Nice work, my man. He's still figuring stuff out. So at age 21, I'm not ready to kind of go real bullish on Cole Perfetti, but and also just the metrics that I saw too. Like, I kind of kept things around where they normally are. Maybe a little bit more ice time. So I don't know. That's kind of just what popped out. But no, I'm interested to hear what you think about Perfetti and Vilardi and why you're going Perfetti there for fantasy production.
Yeah, so I have Perfetti for 45 more seconds at even strength than you do and half a minute on the power play. I think that this is a guy they've kind of just been grooming to be a power play specialist, to be an offensive specialist. Obviously, top 10 draft pick in his draft year, has the pedigree. I think he's a pretty efficient player, high IPP numbers, pretty consistently throughout his young career so far. It's obviously a fairly small sample size, as you mentioned, but so far the returns have been similar in both the seasons that he's gotten into some work in. So I'm just a little bit more bullish on the player and the talent here, I think, than you are, and that resulting in more of a role on the team by the end of the season. So that's pretty much it. And then Velarde, it's just a case where I'm regressing him pretty hard from last year. Definitely redlined on some stats. Definitely not a player that I feel comfortable just
Mhm.
assigning a big role consistently all season long. I feel like he might have some ups and downs in a new situation in Winnipeg. I generally tend to fade players in new situations. You do have obvious
Yep.
situations like Matthew Tkachuk where it works out swimmingly, everything's perfect the first season, but I feel like more often than not there are some growing pains at least along the way, and that just holds down the overall projection for me on Velarde.
One thing on Vilardi, sorry, Nate, really quick
Yep.
here. Like, I think he he's kind of landing in a better position though, I think, in terms of what he was in LA. Like he was kind of on that second line or third line or what have you in LA, but he was behind a lot of guys. Like here, he's only behind Mark Scheifele. Right. So, and that guy might be out of town. Right. So, what if Mark Scheifele gets traded? Now we're looking at Gabe Vilardi as our top line center here in Winnipeg. Like, and they traded for him. They have interest in him. Like, I don't know. It's just, I hear what you're saying in terms of the new face in a new place, but I think he's landing in a potentially better spot for fantasy. And I think at the very least, he's going to get more deployment. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, you have them for marginally more deployment than I do. You have them for just under 17 minutes, and I have them for 60 minutes and 15 seconds. So, yeah, less than 45 seconds average time on ice difference between us. I think it's really just coming down to the talent of the player at hand,
Right.
and you believe in that a little bit more than I do. And then, yeah, a little bit of deployment as well. Let's keep rolling, though. We should talk about Josh Morrissey, who had the immense breakout last season. We do obviously have a pretty strong pullback here. I have him still for 60 points. You have him for 68, so you're definitely more bullish on him than I am. Talk to me about Morrissey.
Yeah, this just comes down again to I think he's Bonus's guy, right? Like he came in there and all of a sudden this guy pops off, right? Like I regressed him a lot because I think he was redlining last season, so I was surprised to see that number come out, but they don't have anybody else to run that offense, in my opinion. Like there was no one. There was hard. It was hard to project somebody else. Like I did Neil Pionk as well, but I'm like, yeah, Morrissey's he's the guy. He's good to go. He's going to get a ton of deployment. And I think, yeah, he just I regressed him a little bit in a lot of categories because he was redlining, but I still just feel really confident in his situation. He's the number one guy on the power play as well. Yeah, and it's just a player that again I think is he might be falling a little bit. I haven't seen Morrissey going as high as the production that he had last year suggests that he should go in drafts. So I'm low key into Morrissey this season. I think there's some potential there for value.
Yeah, it obviously depends where he goes in your drafts. The
Yeah.
biggest difference between our two projections is the even strength IPP. You have it at 51%, and I have it at 40%. So these are Josh Morrissey's IPPs the last number of seasons. Um, yeah, last season 54% IPP. Season before that 28%, then 26%, 30%, 33%, 34%, 26%, going all the way back to his rookie year. So I feel like we just have this strong track record of what is that, 6 seasons of him
Mhm.
being at a certain level, and then 1 season of him being at a completely different level. And I have a hard time really ascribing him all of that just because of a coach or different a different structure, a different playing style being brought in that just somehow benefits him so clearly that he transforms into twice the player he was before. I kind of find that hard to believe, and so I've regressed him pretty heavily, obviously, from 54% IPP to 40%, which would still be like this last season, notwithstanding, would have been his highest in his
Yeah.
career by
Yeah.
like 6%. So um, yeah, that's just where I landed on it. Just choosing to believe that a lot of this was an outlier season for Morrissey. Still, like I mentioned, 60-point player in my projections. Still definitely going to get all that work. Definitely believe what you're saying about him being Bonus's guy and getting all that work. Once again, our time on ice projections are nearly identical. A very, very small difference there. It's really just about what percentage of the offense he's going to be able to garner and create on his own there that I think we differ on. The last two that we should talk about are obviously Shifley and Connor. Shifley you have for 78, Connor you have for 87 with 43 goals. I have Connor for 85 with 41 goals and Shifley for 78 with 37 goals. Very tight,
Mhm.
once again, on our projections here on these two players. I think they are what they are. I think there could be a little bit of a buy window on Connor because he um, had just kind of, yeah, a low season in terms of all of his percentages last year, and I expect that to rebound pretty substantially this year. Uh, I'm pretty in on Connor, the talent. It's really just a case of where he's going to be in your drafts. I would be pretty interested in having him. Anything on those two, Blake, before we wrap up?
Not much. Yeah, I'm with you on Connor. Like, I love to see when a player of his value has a down season, basically, like 81 points in 82 games after 93 the season before. So that means value for us in draft time. So, yeah, Kyle Connor, I'm definitely, certainly in points leagues, I'm loving that. But he's a great power play performer. Mark Scheifele, he just does what he does, right? He's a good value center as well. Yeah, like I said though, I think. There's a good chance he gets traded this season, and that's gonna probably skew his value and his production there. But I did want to mention one thing too. The people that win on prices right, the people that go highest to it without going over, right? So Nate, Price is Right. I think you got it, my man. I'm going over on everything because that's what I do. All right, but yeah, you would definitely win on the Price is Right, and I like that. So there you go.
Love that. All right, Blake, we've done it. We've covered all 32 NHL teams and our projections for them. It was a mammoth task creating the projections. It was another mammoth task doing all these podcasts about them, but we have reached the end here. Before we leave, I would be remiss if I didn't plug the Apples and Geos Discord server. You need to get in there. We're still doing best ball drafts. We'll be running those until we run out of time with the season impending. We are up to 18 best ball drafts done with more on the way. So get into the Discord server so you can be a part of that. Join some of those drafts against some sharp managers. See what everybody's thinking about these players for this season. While you're at it, please do take a second wherever you're listening and give us a quick rating and or review. It really does help the podcast, especially in this crucial time when people are tuning in for their fantasy hockey content. But that's all we've got for this episode. Hopefully, it brought you some value and helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, which you should definitely go check out. Many thanks to the band there for supplying the music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. That's it, folks. Much love.